So my name is Vanessa Shulz. I'm an embodiment coach. I mainly work with the human stress response, with the bodily layer of the human stress response. As there's this body-mind connection, and if we shift our bodies, we shift our mind, and that's easier said than done. And there's a lot about self-care. There's a lot about self-leadership, and whatever the trigger is, the response is just the same dynamic going on in the human. And I will elaborate a little bit on how stress happens, like what is basically happening also in your body, in your nervous system, your biology, that you cannot even outthink. And this is not about like, oh, we cannot do anything about it, but we're used to work on the wrong things. So I understand this slide is, at least for me, it looks very flattering, but I'm actually 42. I've been to some years of crisis. I've been through burnout experiences. I've been not experiences, phases, would be honest to share. I've been trained for 4 years now, and now I also train coaches myself, or assist on coaching programs myself, mainly in the field of trauma-informed stress and resilience. And self-leadership is a huge part of it. Self-care is a huge part of it. And the way that we react, the way that we are capable of understanding what's happening around us and working with what's happening around us, and also like inside of us, how we deal with ourselves. How much space do we actually have to respond, right? That's pretty much my profession. So for myself, I've been living, traveling for quite some years, which sounds very romantic on Instagram. It's actually quite uncomfortable. I don't want to complain. I learned a lot. It's basically being the idiot 80% of the day, wherever you are. So it's pretty much unpredictable. I've been in situations where I needed to go to a campsite for a week instead of an Airbnb, because that guy just like went to the mountains. I didn't understand the language. I was somewhere in Latin America. So all this kind of stuff, of course, that's not the load, especially not the emotional load of a divorce, of all that history that is with that, of a person relying on me. And yet the stress response is happening in the body that kind of shape what we're working with, and what your options are to work with your situation, and to find the right way of, how do I want to show up tomorrow? How do I want to show up for my kid? What do I want to live for that? And how can I somehow manage all this and still know that I can do this in another year as well? That's pretty much the same dynamics that are underlying. So I'm not going to tell you how to talk to your kids, or how to make up your life in the end, but I will show you a little bit of how to navigate the level of arousal in your nervous system, and then you hopefully find something that works individually for you. And as we are only so many people participating live, I guess maybe that's not the easiest time, early evening in Europe, for people to join. I'm not quite sure how late is it where you are, Ashley, in Chicago? Didn't really look that up.
It's noon, so lunchtime.
Yeah, okay. So for you, like with the school kids, pretty good, right? Got that. Cool. Great. So yeah, but there will be some space for Q&A. So if you have any situation, we could even do a mini type of coaching here if you want to, if you're open to, because that's quite an intimate thing. But if you wanted to, then we wouldn't go into the story so much, because what we're looking at today is really the bodily layer of your experience, which brings us very much to the sensory level. Okay. And with that in mind, do you have any questions already? Anything that you want to bring up, or anything that you want me to put an emphasis on? Okay, great. Let's start. You will see I didn't choose this. I chose this profession because I'm crappy at PowerPoint presentations, but I just made some visuals to guide us along, because it can be a bit heady. And we actually want to come into the body for experiencing, right? This is experience learning. I guess you know a lot of stuff already. You probably read some books and listened to some experts, but it's probably just hard to feel it in the right moment and to remember it in the right moment to really be useful. So let me give you a bit of an overview. Where is that thing? Just had it open. Do that. This is why this is also why we have Valentina here, because she's really good at staying on top of the tech stuff. So there we go. Okay. You might know this actually in some version of, I'm not sure, did you play Mario Kart or Super Mario as a kid? Do you know this energy bar that shows up in games?
You mean video game?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
We're not that old.
Sorry. So in my time, when we had that Game Boy, when we had the first real stuff on the TV screen, it would be usually that this would be like the energy bar, probably the green full capacity thing, the full power bar would be on the right side, but never mind, like it's still the same, right? And the more often I got hit by turtle, the more energy I lost and the more capacity for the next hit I lost. So I knew like, oh, I have like maybe 3 more things and then I would need to start the level all over. And the more I got towards here, so there would be a point between the yellow and the red where the music would be faster and be more energizing and everything became more dramatically and everything is kind of like, oh, now I have to push through. So you hear the sound of my voice already. That's pretty much what happens in life already. You can think of levels of activation in your nervous system, which means that you have impulses coming in from the outside, also like from your emotions, what you're processing inside. It's also some information that your whole bodily system needs to deal with, which is, we can think of it as the nervous system as one big part of it, but connected to that is obviously like how that shows in your body. Connected with that is your whole biochemistry. And connected with that is also how much information you can perceive. Like how well does your senses work? And how do you process them? That's maybe the most crucial thing that I found most fascinating when I started learning about this, is that the more I am activated, the more my body, before I even can think about it, I don't have choice about this, but my body is just narrowing down to what is actually grabbing my attention right now, right in front of me, more and more. And I don't hear things anymore. I'm saying but this is just a human thing. This is our core biology. It's basically how we work as this our hardware, right? So there are studies about people registering less sounds, less things going on around them. People could talk to them and they wouldn't even hear it. They wouldn't even understand that someone's talking to them. And say like, or maybe you know the situation that you're in an argument and you say 10 things and there's just like one mean word or one word that is just triggering the other person, and this is all that they kind of like grab onto. And that's exactly what happens when we're overly activated in the nervous system. Where there's activation, there's also regulation, and there's also release of information. And there's usually like normal natural ways to do it. And our body is also made to step into those phases. Very often, life is so loaded, especially as a parent, life is so loaded with a certain amount of stress that there is not enough space basically to regulate that out. So you have a little less capacity. Your starting point would probably be already on yellow when the next morning begins. So you just have a little less tolerance. There are words for that. So there is something called polyvagal theory. This is what modern psychology is based on. This is what trauma work is based on, what shadow work is based on. And it's basically a theory that is very well studied on of the nervous system. So what you would need to know is that there are 2 main stages of the nervous system. There are more, but for today, and to make it not too bulky, let's say, and too complex, 2 are super, super important. So one is rest and digest, and the other one is fight, flight, freeze. Hi, someone's online and there is some background noise. Carolina, I will mute you.
Yeah, perfect.
Hi, welcome. Good that you're here. So I cannot mute you actually. I think I'm just covered.
I'll try to do my best.
Great, thank you. So those 2, you can imagine them like a switch on or off, but obviously there's some space in between. So
if I come to, I will leave and just see somehow just
Yeah.
in records for example.
I'm sorry, Ekaterina, can you please mute yourself? Or maybe Valentina, can you do it?
Okay, sorry.
Well, let's hope for the best. I would just keep talking.
Right for that.
You guys can still understand me well, right? Ashley, Solomon, still good. Okay. So rest and digest is basically like our happy way of being. It's when we are playful, when we are creative, when we're really relaxed. There's also like this spaciousness in our bodies. There's a relatively relaxed muscle tone. And there might have been a while where you have felt like that. But that's the really good moments, right? That's the, you're sitting there with a friend, your body feels safe. There's nothing to, your body, your nervous system feels safe, which means that there is not a pile of things that you have to tick off your list. There's also no tiger, but we know about this already. So the nervous system doesn't actually discern between which type of information is coming in. And it is built for the tigers in the jungle. So that's why it's basically very useful. Not so much in today's normal life. Like, give me a sign. Have you heard about this already? Like,
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Yeah,
that's like basic coping mechanism.
Yeah, right. So that's
not only human beings, it's like for mammals as well.
That's true. So basically, also somatic coaching, that's the same principles. We have a very similar nervous system. We have a very similar basic functions of the brain. We do have the neocortex, which is a bit different, obviously, but that's just an outer layer. So most of the time we have some idea already of what's happening, but not so much of how that feels in the body. So rest and digest, if you want to rate this would be like, I'm maybe at a 2 to 4 out of 10 on a stress level, right? And then there's this where everything feels a bit more tight, maybe a bit more, this is a bit more work to do. And I need to really keep it down. I need to control myself here in that situation. And I have to maybe, I couldn't escalate now, but you can still like keep it in. Oftentimes people understand this as some sense, they sense something like wanting to burst out, wanting to come up, or acceleration. That happens in the body when the world starts spinning faster, or some tension coming in. And depending on our life situation, our life setting, it can be that this is basically the new normal, that we're constantly walking on the edge already, that there is not so much space for actual nourishment in between. So for those who are not familiar with the polyvagal theory and the nervous system, there is this turning point. At some point, there is just like so much stress hormones released in the body. There's so much tension, how you can like perceive that. And what basically happens is that there is enough hormones released in the body that tell your brain this danger is too much to cope with it. So we need to turn into defense mode. We need to do something about the situation, which then activates a different part of the nervous system, which is called the sympathetic nervous system, and we come into fight-flight response. Basically an activation, and that can be like activation running away, like avoiding situations, or it could be an activation of confronting, which is often leading to some overreaction. Why does that happen quite fast here? It's not a very linear thing. So there's 3 factors. The one is we perceive less information. Second is we have this kind of like a filter of suspiciousness. The more activated we already are, we tend to look at the same information a bit more suspicious. Like, are you really like, do you have to make this comment right now? Right? It's not the same as if another person would say that, or if you had a good night's sleep, or you hear the same person saying the same thing when you just come back out of vacation. You're receiving it with a different, let's say, filter, and you give it another meaning. And that is dependent, that interpretation is also dependent on how activated you are in the nervous system. So pretty good also for that to learn how to regulate that, which is then also like whatever happens, there's just like tiny things that kind of like make the situation escalate. You can compare this with a glass of water. So it's really like this, at this point between the yellow, like the end of your tolerance, and the red, this is like where it just like drops out. And there's basically two ways of dealing with it. One is taking out some sip of water, and another one is trying to get a bigger glass, right? Which makes it like escalate less. And this is two different ways of how you can work with them. Okay, so far, is this, it's a bit challenging to meet everyone's level of what they know already. I know we're fortunately a really small group here, but does that make sense so far to you guys?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All good.
Good. If any questions come up, as we are this small group, like please feel free to come in. So something I know, it's also not your generation, right? Well, Marvel was active in the last couple of years. So yeah, this is a very handsome guy. I do love Edward Norton a lot, but I just found this picture to be better here. And it's not like we're an evil person or we're a good person. We're really just contextual, and this is very normal human biology. Another thing that I want to mention is also that we are built to step into that red zone. We are built to step into fight flight. You might have heard of freeze and fawn response. It's technically not the same. It's also another part of the nervous system. There's another way to work with that a little bit, but it's also what happens after the tolerance, right? So it's also like an escalation situation, and then it's just a different response for every person. But it's not that we're good or that we're evil. It's really that we are the same person and a different activation level. So for our system, another response is the appropriate one. It just does not always match what's actually happening in reality around us. So how can we make this a bit of a better match? You might have seen this already, the neocortex and or the brain. This is like your whole capacity, right? I know our brain is not circular, but you can think of this as a very strict hierarchy. So the kind of like the core of our brain is really that instinctual, defensive. You might have heard of mammal brain or primal brain. That kind of stuff. This is like I have to defend myself. I'm doing everything out of my gut and being basically very reactive and very like, well, you could say it's present based, but it's probably also not a very smart way to see the world, right? It's quite reactive. It's very defensive. It's often confrontational. It's basically the fight flight thing. Then there's the limbic system, where we often process our emotions, and they're really close to each other when it comes to how they work together. The limbic system is connected, or the memory. Again, this is a super surface presentation of how our brain works, right? But just for this context, it's going to be good enough to get the logic and dynamic behind it. So the limbic system, it's the thing that basically gets triggered when we are reminded of, oh, this has happened to me before. And it fills us with fear, which is that what makes this escalation work, which is then bringing us into, oh, now I have to do something about it. Now I have to go with my instincts. I have to defend myself, right? So the amygdala, which is, I don't want to go too much into neuroscience. I'm also not a neuroscientist, so I might just be too sloppy on that, and that would be a shame. But basically, just know whenever you feel strong emotions, it's usually your nervous system that's being activated. And this is very closely connected to your brainstem, where you kind of like slip into the more reactive than responsive version of being you. And the neocortex is the cognitive system. This is all your good intentions. This is all you want to be. This is all what you reflected on when you asked yourself, like, oh, how can I do this better the next time? Or when you have this, could be also like when you just came out of an argument and then you get the good answer, and then you're like, oh, I didn't get that reply. Why couldn't I just be me? Why couldn't I just be confident in the situation? Why couldn't I just have this discussion without emotion? Why did I slip into that again? So to be able to do all these good things, to listen, to be collaborative, to trust, we need to have an activated neocortex. if we are too highly activated in the nervous system, our biology is just hijacking that. We have no, it's almost like, even with good training and very intense training, it's almost impossible to get directly out of that fight-flight response back into like, to, how would you say that in English? To kind of like not get hijacked by that fight-flight response, right? To regulate yourself back into that. So for the normal person with who's not living on the mountains in a Zen retreat, but who has to deal with daily life and with the challenge that life offers, and especially as a parent, like there's a lot of unpredictability. There's not so much control of how intense are things just like coming to me. And for those brave souls who shared already what's going on in their lives, which is quite an emotional challenge, which is quite a mental load as well in terms of organization. How do I start the sentence? So to be able to cope with that, the most useful way is to sense into what happens way before we're at that turning point. What happens way before? What happens? How do I recognize when I slip from green into yellow? When I'm not at the 7 or maybe like a 6 where I feel it like wanting to burst out already, but just like, oh, I'm at a 5. Maybe I just give myself a little bit more space. So how can I take out a sip of water before I am too close to that border, just to be able to handle a bit more? Yeah, as you can see, I'm professional on illustrations here. So those empty glasses of water. Let me get back to that in a minute and stop the screen sharing. Okay. Let's do a little exercise to feel into that. How would that like feel in the body instead of just talking about this? Because I reckon that you probably have understood everything I said. You probably have heard this already before. And you might have an idea, but let's take a look at what happens specifically in your body. You don't have to share. This is your experience. If you feel more comfortable doing so, you can, of course, like go off screen, put the video off again. If not, it's lovely to see your faces. And the idea behind that is that, so we have this mental perspective on how we experience the world. We have the emotional perspective on how we experience the world. And we have the somatic one. And all of these are constantly giving each other information, influencing, and kind of like designing each other constantly. You might try to be super depressed while jumping on a trampoline. It's not going to work. Once you stop jumping on a trampoline, you cannot stay sad anymore, because the movement that you're doing is giving your brain and your nervous system the information, oh no, we're not depressed. I'm sorry, we're not sad anymore. You're probably not laughing and not having like your life all good, but there's information coming back into that, into your system, giving it like, oh, we're not in danger here. We're not in threat. If we have time for this kind of stuff, then life's pretty much safe. So there will be an emotional and a mental response accordingly to what you do in the body. And I suppose that you have done quite some work around like, how can I sit with my emotions? How can I try to, if my thoughts are spiraling, how can I kind of like break the cycle? It's really difficult to do this with your emotions and with your thoughts. It's not so difficult to make the bodily layer workable, because you can always alter your alignment once you know what you're doing. You can always change your breath once you understand how you're breathing in a situation. And this is not the only solution. This is not about engineering yourself into being another person or into optimizing anything. But this is really just like, how can I make this a bit more practical, a bit more precise, and a bit more effective when I need this extra second in my life, when I need this little bit extra capacity, when I need to be a bit smarter about things or decisions. And sometimes just how can I give myself a little bit of self-care when the list is still so long? So how can I take out a huge bunch of water out of that glass overnight, maybe when I have super little time for that? So to do that, we need to learn something called somatic awareness. And this is not so much reflecting about how you feel, or what you're thinking, or what you're doing, but this is really about what are you doing in your body on a sensory level? What can you perceive? So you get some information that you can work with later. Does that make sense? Yeah, cool. Okay. So I would guide you into a little bit of centering. You might have seen a video that was shared. I think it was on the blog of Save the Kids shared already. Centering is basically something that brings you into a more balanced state, that brings you at least a little bit more towards the rest and digest state. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it's the one tool that can help you regulate. And obviously, this depends on what you're doing. So it's not this one technique, but it's more like I'm doing the one thing, so I would do the opposite to center myself. Let's start from there. We'll do a very quick, yeah, you know what, let's do it already. So I see you're sitting. You can also do the standing, but seated might be nice to join into. So feel your feet on the floor. Place them approximately hip width apart. Snuggle around a little bit on your chair. Feel your sit bones on the chair. Come into the experience of being your body. So you may want to rub your hands on your thighs. Your sit bones on the chair. You may want to wiggle your toes a little bit. That might be nice. I think so. Awareness in like, how do my feet feel where they touch the surface of the floor? Now, inhaling, bring the shoulder a little bit more above the hips. Doesn't have to be super ballerina, great alignment. Just needs to be a bit more comfortable to sit upright without so much core engagement to hold you there. Another inhale. And you may place your hands on your thighs, or just letting them hang loosely next to you, depending on how you're sitting on a chair. You can place them in front of you on a table. If you have a table in front of you, that might be nice experience, different for everyone again. And again, take a little bit of movement to the left, to the right, and find how is it to sit like right in the middle. Where's that cozy? Once more, bring your shoulders above your hips, and exhaling, think towards your hips, think a bit downwards. So you might notice your shoulders dropping already. And one last inhale. Just think about the ceiling above you, and exhale through the mouth. And if you open, just say, ah. Might be just a pleasant experience. Right? So that's, if you have time to do this, usually your nervous system knows like, okay, world's pretty safe right now. we got a minute of break. This is one very classic way of centering, right? Because usually we tend to be overactivated. Obviously, if we're very tired, we would need to activate ourselves a bit more. But make a little body scan internally. Imagine like, how's my posture now? Where is this? How does it feel to be that neutral? Do I hold any unnecessary tension in my body? Maybe my jaw. How's my gaze? Do I have those muscles here a bit tightened? How tense is my belly? What are my hands doing? Kind of like cringing a bit, or are they relaxed open fingers? Take another breath in. And on the next exhale, preferably to the open mouth, relax part, just the muscle. If it doesn't work that well, you can just imagine to soften it. How would that be to have that belly a little bit more soft? Good. So I invite you to think of a situation that happened maybe today, maybe this week, relatively recent, that is slightly annoying. It's not threatening your world. It's nothing that is too irritating. We're not doing any trauma therapy here, but something that is just like, I don't know, someone slipped the coffee over you, or was a bit rude, or it doesn't have to be anything personal, just something that brings up a bit of annoyance and maybe frustration. Can you spot a difference in your body? Can you feel maybe your alignment changing a bit? Maybe your posture changes. What are your hands doing? Do you feel a bit more agitated, or I want to do something? Do you feel annoyed? Is there any sensation of tightness in your body, or of coming up, down, forwards, backwards? All of these are suggestions. You don't have to feel all of them, but there may be one or two that are particularly remarkable for you and easy to spot. So this is just finding data. What is a good way for you to work with that? And oftentimes, especially when starting these type of practices, it's good to have a bit more contrast, to come back into, okay, now bring your shoulders back above your hips. You may want to roll them a bit and see if there may be some tension creeped in and you didn't even notice that happening. Can you still feel your feet on the floor? Take another breath in and exhale. Soften your gaze, soften your belly, soften your jaw. Did you notice something changing? Look at Solomon and Ashley, because I can see you. Can you give me a sign? Is there anything that you could work with? Great. Great. Ashley, for you too. Good. It's pretty obvious, right? And obviously, this is not the situation that you may want to work on, but this is the technique. And this can be something that you can train yourself to notice quickly. So you then know, oh, this is happening again. Okay, so just to give you an overview, what is the idea behind that? Once you understand that you're tightening that part of your body, that you're coming forward, or that the word's turning faster, you can train yourself that it becomes habitual to regulate that once that creeps in. Okay, and the idea is to spot early. This is why we're not going to what was the most annoying thing that happened to you last month, but just what is slightly annoying, so you get a little bit of response. This activation thing that I showed you, that escalation scale, you can think of this as some sort of movement as well. So if I were to, you might understand that I talk a lot. You might understand that I am a person that loves activation and doing things. So for me, the pattern would usually be coming forwards. So whenever I feel stressed, I create safety. It's a very overused term these days, but I create a sense of, yes, I'm on top of it by doing stuff, not by going away. And my body always tenses up here, brings me forward. And once I'm here, I'm usually very firm, and I'm usually very yeah, well, I mean, I trained these things, so I'm probably not that escalating that much anymore, but I would be very confrontational with situations, with people, I would be overly direct in my communication. That would be one way of how that shows, right? But all of this starts, if you think of this as a movement, it's not here. It's happening here already, when I tense up my shoulders slightly, when I come from a 3 to a 5, when I come forward just a centimeter, and maybe just being a bit more assertive. That is already a sign for me to be like, do I want to show up like this? Do I want to be assertive in this situation? What could be my, not red, but orange flag for, okay, take a step back now, right? Let me call you back in 5 minutes. Let's find someone to be with us in this conversation. Does that make sense? Right? Okay, cool. Yeah, let's check that out. There's this thing, I talked a lot about biochemistry already and hormones already. And obviously we can regulate ourselves down that escalation thing, but sometimes we just need to process, right? So regulation first means that I will be bringing myself back to a state in which I can handle it the way that I want. But you can think of it as I am borrowing myself some capacity here. Basically, I'm going into debt, and I will need to create any space in which I can process what happens, in which I can sit with the emotion, because we just work with the somatic layer. That alone is not enough. You're not a robot, right? You have emotions, you have needs. They want to be seen, they want to be addressed. You want to be seen like this. Maybe there's still some anger. It's not about down regulating or suppressing all of this stuff. It's just about how can I show up in this situation the way that I want to, or a bit more than I want to, and then bring the processing into a container of choice. All right. If you don't process it, you will never be able to empty that glass enough. Okay, makes sense? Shaking. You said already, Solomon, animals do a lot of that, right? If you see a dog that's getting scared, it's just gonna shake it out and go on with their life. So this is why dancing, why movement always helps us. Not always, often helps us. Shouting, some hyperactivation, something that is really like very expressive. Why is that? I don't want to be going into an esoteric, trauma stored in the hip. That's basically not esoteric. It depends on the facilitator. It can be very profound, but body parts don't necessarily mean anything like where anything is stored, or what meaning would be behind that. We're all very unique in how we process things and how we do things. What will be there quite practically, you would be the person that would mostly find tension in the hips, or mostly find tension in their neck, or mostly find tension in their jaw, or clench their jaw, right? So it makes sense to work with that. Whatever the meaning and the story behind that is, there can be something that you want to dig up in another point, but practically for that moment, that doesn't really belong. And yet, these are the hormones that make you, those stories where a kid gets trapped under the car and there's someone developing superhuman forces to lift that car and get that kid out. That's basically what happens in your body, because there's a threat, you have to meet it. So you get a lot of that extra energy, let's say it like that. And if you stay in this state for longer than 30 minutes, I mean, chemistry doesn't just like diffuse, right? You have to work with that. You have to get that out of your system, out of your body. So self-care is a huge part of resilience. Self-care is a huge part of self-leadership. And I understand that there's not always a lot of time for that, but there's stuff that can be done quickly. The regulation technique that I just showed you, the centering, that will be different for everyone, depending on what you're doing, right? The poison is the cure. That helps you to get a little bit of more tolerance to deal with that situation. And then later you need to process. So before I continue repeating myself, let me ask you guys, what could be, you don't have to tell me the story, but it might be nice to have an idea of what you just did in your body when you were stressed. So I can give you an idea of principles of how to work with that.
You mean like right now when we were thinking in our head?
Yeah.
I felt my jaw tighten up, and I can definitely tell if, and my dentist brought it up too, that I've been grinding my teeth lately at night, and I didn't even realize, but it's obviously tension that's manifesting like here.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll wake up and like I'll feel that it's sore.
Yeah, that makes sense. So a good way of centering could be, I'm going to bring this into what is a good practice. How can you practice this with tiny bits? Because you probably don't have an extra time, an extra hour to do yoga every day. But something that you may want to include in your practice would be consciously unclenching the jaw, checking in, rating that, right? Make it visible, make it obvious for you how you are. And this is, as this is very, very remarkably visible for you, you could give it like, oh, today, this is like a 3 out of 10. I can basically keep it there. Or, oh, there must have been some hard nights, some processing, like I wake up and it's super painful. So just like taking this sign of your body as, first of all, how am I today? You can basically, like, once you know that your stress and tension is becoming very visible in this, you can also go back and say like, oh, probably I might need to take a step back today. Probably I might be a little bit more kind with myself today, just because obviously there's something, maybe not even something that is very obvious in my life going on. Maybe I'm just processing some emotion or whatever, but that's basically how am I today? And that can give you a very good hint about like, where am I? How much is my capacity today? And then how could you unclench your jaw every time you check in with yourself? So do little check-ins and then centerings. And with the centering, if you open your lips slightly, there is no chance of clenching your jaw. You can't. It's just technically not possible. So if you would get used on just doing this a few times daily, this is something that I will introduce you to how to practice that. But this might be a very powerful way for you to have like super tiny things that can already make a change, and that over time become habitual. You won't even think about doing that anymore. You're going to do that automatically. Because there's some hierarchies in our nervous system. And we all know that, oh, I want to defend myself, so I go into fight flight. But once I know I'm safe, I want to thrive. That's not a hierarchy. That's just another dynamic that our body does. It wants longevity. Once we're in a relaxed state, means that we can regenerate ourselves, we can regenerate our nervous system, we can basically be well and do that for a longer period of time. We are friendlier, we have more connection to other people. So once we're out of the danger zone, it will do everything to keep you out of the danger zone unless it's super necessary. That's why it works. Thank you. Solomon, if you want, I'm happy if you chair as well. You don't have to.
Yeah, sure. So what I felt, and I actually constantly feel it when I have some kind of anxiety, my shoulders tighten up and they lift a little bit like this, right? And also I start rubbing my hands like this, and same with my feet. I start trembling, like I have to go.
Great noticing. Did you sense anything like more of an upward or downward motion, forward or backward? Was that something that was somewhat tangible for you?
What do you mean upward emotion? What do you mean by that?
Feel this is not something that works for everyone, but some people feel like being pulled or being like lifted or losing connection to the ground.
No, I don't think so. No.
Okay.
No. I feel pretty stable at the time.
Okay, cool. So this is some form of self-soothing, self-assuring yourself, which is basically not a bad thing to do. This is something that we also teach people when they have anxiety things, right? This is a little form of a self-hug, basically. So it's soothing down your nervous system and telling yourself it's all right. It is something that, well, if it's appropriate, if you feel all right with that, you can continue doing that. The other thing with the shoulders, quite obvious, it's also like becoming small somehow, right? If you say like it's coming forward and kind of rolling in. Did more up?
No, it lifts
So
like this. Yeah.
Lifts like that. So you feel bigger or smaller when you do that?
I feel stiffer.
Safer, great. How could you do the opposite of that?
And that's
What would
safer,
be
stiff. I
doing
feel
it the
stiff. It's
stiff.
yeah.
What is the opposite of stiffness?
Relaxed.
What is the opposite movement? Relax. Not
Just
always super
drop them
easy,
down
but
like this.
movement. Right? Yeah. So
Yeah.
rigidity and stiffness could be met with movement. A lot of people come into I'm armoring myself here. If you're a bit coming into so open hands could be nice. You could try this also, like opening the hands with the palms forwards, try to relax the fingers. Well, we would need to look at this in a bit more spacious container, obviously, and I would need to see your whole body to give you a bit more of specific things, like try this out and try this out. But you can play with this a little bit for yourself. You could also video tape yourself and see, like, observe what you do in the body. That usually gives a little bit of more hints. So hands are crucial. This is nice for self-soothing, but it could also be that you're becoming even more rigid through this movement, because it's usually also preparing to fight, right? Preparing to get big. So the counter movement of that would be opening. Counter movement of that would be relaxing the hands. It could be a bit of a giving thing with relaxed shoulders. Let me show you that here on a chair. So if you were to sit like this, you might need to first really tense up your shoulders and then exhaling, dropping them. If you sit like this, this will only work if your shoulders are relatively strongly above your hips. If you're leaning maybe even a little bit backwards, as if you would be receiving, I don't know, someone who's giving a nice talk that you find pleasant, and you're like, oh, yeah, that's interesting. It's a bit of a listening pose. If you're feeling comfortable with that, think of the situation that is a bit annoying, and you may find your body going back into that activation thing. Take an inhale, exhale, and come back here. Okay. When you did this 2 or 3 times, and you find another, let's say, this is a very, we say that we call that sometimes somatic cue. So there was the jaw, which is one very good determinator of like, how am I? Also like probably how do I wake up? How is my state today? But also how am I right now? Another one is the hands, the shoulders, as you named already. They're quite obvious. So see which one is easiest for you to manipulate and to check in with and to work with. And when you do that, practice. Let me make a point so I have a bit of structure. You might find that I improvise a lot. Okay, let me give you some really clear information on that. So practice is not application. This will not be something that happens that you can do or remember to do in an argument with someone, or in a stress situation with your child, or when anything is happening where you're triggered already. You won't practice it there. You practice it when you're all right. You practice it when you don't have triggers, so you have it available in the stress situations. What we want to do is kind of like integrate this in your nervous system as an option that you currently don't have. So the more you're triggered, the more you're towards the red, the more you're on the yellow state. You can always use this already before to kind of like take a little bit of water out of the glass, and you have more tolerance. You will find yourself dealing with situations differently already. And with just a bit more practice, it feels a bit as if there would be a time window opening. And at first you might just notice like, oh, I know this already. And you still go for the same response that you would usually show. And that's all right, because you're still practicing, right? But with time, actually relatively quickly, it happens that there opens up a little bit of space. And you could be like, let's try this differently, right? So you actually will be able to change the situation. Your practice needs to be contained. This is the most important thing. You cannot do this at work. You cannot do this with your kids. You cannot do this with your partners or ex-partners. And please don't try that with your mother-in-law. It doesn't work. Please don't try that with your parents at Christmas. It doesn't work. They're just like, we have histories in our bodies, which is being triggered. We don't always have the same window of tolerance with every context and every person, right? So this is why we want to have this contained. What does that mean? That means there is no consequence. You couldn't practice boundaries with your boss by saying, fuck you, right? Sorry for the language. I hope no kid is watching. But this is not a safe thing to practice, right? There's also, you couldn't tell your kid to be 20% less annoying because you're learning something. It's not going to work, right? So you want to have something where you can, well, best is to have someone to work with. If, let's say you're doing an Aikido practice or a yoga practice already. You might want to talk with your facilitator and be like, hey, I'm practicing self-regulation. I think by now most people should know what that is, especially in that field of some form of embodiment practices. And when you go in there with the intention of, I am working on dealing with making mistakes, right? And in Aikido, you fall a lot, or you're learning something new and just like, how do I respond here? Right? There you would use those centering techniques. You would notice, how do I feel in my body that I'm stressed right now? Do I make myself bigger, or do I clench my jaw? Try again. Start from a different point on that activation scale. Do that in practice. This is going to be the strongest thing that you do, you probably don't have time for extra long practices. So if you do something already regularly, if you go for walks, if you go to the gym, you will find situations in which you can project your intention of working, right? And do it with some movements. Even if you just do some push-ups at home, or if you do some chaturangas, you could be like, this is not my responsibility. If you think about this while doing the movement, your nervous system is learning already. And this is different than being in an argument with another person, okay? So this also needs to be practical, probably for you guys. So in case you don't have any extra space, or you're not having a certain space container already for self-care or for movement, I recommend you do check-ins. We can only change what we notice. Same counts for what we do in the body. So the first bit is always to evaluate, how am I today? How am I in this month? How am I probably in this phase, in the cycle of something happening in my life? Right? There might be some bigger process that you're involved in. So the first bit of the check-in is, you may do the somatic thing again. Try to not go so much in the story. It's really draining and it slips through anyway. So don't do it deliberately. But for the purpose of self-regulation, it's totally okay to check in with, do I feel my feet on the floor? How tense are my muscles? How is my perception of the world right now? Does it spin faster or slower? Am I big, or am I appropriate in my size? Am I shrinking, or am I being me? How do I stand? Do I go into some kind of like smallifying deviation, or do I stand confidently and solid on the ground? How relaxed are my shoulders? What are my hands doing? What's my gaze doing? What is my jaw doing? This can be a 30-second practice. I would suggest that you put yourself 3 alarms, and you try to keep doing this twice per day out of the 3 alarms for 5 days per week. Aim for that. You will probably be doing that just as like, oh, what is my internal weather? More of an emotional thing. If you find yourself being in a conversation, you might invite them actually to join. Right? So, I'm doing this thing where I develop some more somatic awareness. So I would just take a moment for myself. If you want to join, I'm checking in with, what am I doing in my body? What's my posture? What's my tension? What's my breath doing? And people are usually very surprised and quite happy to jump on and to try that again as well. So 30 seconds of checking in with yourself, how you are through the day. Then follow this idea of the poison is the cure. This is not the space to have a super personalized one-on-one coaching, obviously, and it's not contextual very much. So in a session, this would be different, but you for yourself can do already a lot. If you just notice yourself coming forward, then the second part of that, let's say 1 minute, would be the centering bit. Coming backward. You find yourself becoming rigid, go into some movement. Find yourself clenching your jaw, soften your jaw. Usually that comes into the neck as well. Right? The whole area might be something. Could be that you go into a little dance. Could be that you have this. Whoever clenches their jaw, because I think actually you're not the only one. That's both of you describe quite super common. I don't want to say symptoms, but ways of how stress shows in the body, and it's noticeable. Postural things that you could do is bring your head backwards, because heads are heavy and we tend to look at phones and screens a lot. So just like having this come into deliberate double or triple chin is doing a lot for the neck muscles that you cannot wish yourself out of, right? So just doing this does a lot already. Swallow. And this keeps you from pressing your tongue against your upper part of the mouth. And roll your shoulders a bit. If you find a particular area of your body difficult to relax, it's often helpful to overly tense them. So if you cannot relax your shoulders from here, but you know that there's tension, really do it too much. And then it's easier to release. Same with the belly. If you have a relaxed belly, you cannot possibly be stressed. Your body doesn't allow for you to be stressed when you have a relaxed belly, but it's not always easy to relax that, right? So yeah, I'm sorry for being a bit late here. Please do leave. The recording is still running, so Valentina is going to send that out, and you will catch up with the last 2 minutes or so. Yeah, so you can always on the inhale tense up the belly really rigidly, and on the exhale it's easier to relax that then. Okay. Jenny, we didn't really talk. I'm not sure how, if you have any question, or Ashley, if you have any other question, I'm happy to stay 5 minutes longer. Okay, great. So there was a lot of talking, probably some things that came up already, or where you found yourself like, oh, this is something that I tend to always do. This might be helpful. Even this tiny practice of 1 minute twice per day, if you do that for, let's say, 2 weeks, I promise you will find a difference already in how you respond. It's not going to change the everything in life, but it's going to make a lot of the crappy situations somehow easier. And just the simple act of checking in with yourself is such a sweet, easy little way of giving yourself some love and self-care that also creates a bit of an echo already. So great. Thank you for being here and giving me your time and attention. If you have any more questions, I am linked up in the Facebook group of Sadie Kids. I'm pretty sure that there will be another email in case you're not there yet. In case you're came here from, I think Instagram was also something where they promoted this masterclass. You can find me there, Vanessa Shulz. I'm working one-on-one. I'm thinking of offering a mini self-care course and coming into somatic awareness, like a 15 minutes per week thing, like developing different languages of how to have access to the body, of how to get out a huge chunk of water out of the glass when there is a little bit of time left, but without needing to go into a yoga class every day or for an hour of run, right? So just to find a little bit more options. Different things work for different people. It's useful to play a bit. Yeah. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Hope it helped. Bye.
Bye.